Hey there, welcome to my session on risk management. Today I shall talk on three important things which are related to the risk management. These are number one, the categories of risk, number two, understanding the concept of risk exposure, risk appetite, and number three, the risk capacity. Finally, I'm going to talk regarding the distinction between risk capacity and risk tolerance. So let's start by understanding the categories of risk. The risk has been broadly classified into six major categories, namely market risk, credit risk, operational risk, strategic risk, liquidity risk, and finally the hazard risk. So let's understand one by one what these risks are with the help of the examples. So market risk is the risk which is associated with the losses due to unfavorable price movements that affect the market as a whole. These markets includes your commodities, any market carries this risk. Because market risk affects the entire market and not specific assets, it can be avoided through your portfolio diversification. Market risk is also called as a systematic risk. It is not specific to an industry but linked to the market activities such as economic turmoil, interest rates, and the natural disasters. So one of the best ways to lessen the impact of a loss due to the market risk is through hedging. There are four types of market risk which we study. These are number one, interest rate risk, number two, the equity price risk, number three, the exchange rate risk, and number four, the commodity price risk. So second category of risk is credit risk. Credit risk is also known as a default risk. Credit risk is the risk of loss due to a borrower not repaying a loan. More specifically, it refers to a lender's risk of having its cash flows interrupted when borrower does not pay the principal or interest to it. So credit risk is considered to be higher when the borrower does not have the sufficient cash flows to pay the creditor, or it does not have sufficient assets to liquidate to repay the creditor. If the risk of non-payment is higher, the lender is more likely to demand compensation in the form of higher interest rates. The next category is operational risk, and this is our third category of risk. So operational risk summarizes the uncertainties and hazards a company faces when it attempts to do its day-to-day business activities within a given field or the industry. It is a type of business risk that can result from the breakdowns in internal procedures, people, and the systems, as opposed to the problems incurred from external forces such as your political and economic events or inherent to the entire market or market segment known as systematic risk. Operational risk can also be classified as a variety of unsystematic risk that are unique to a specific company or an industry. Moving ahead, let us go further to the fourth category of risk. This is called as the strategic risk. So what is strategic risk? Strategic risk is the probability that an event will interfere with a company business model. So strategic risk undermines the value proposition which attracts the customers and generate profits. For example, if a company's business model is to be a low cost provider of a product and a competitor from a low wage country suddenly enters the market, the company will find that its value proposition has been destroyed. So this is the strategic risk. The fifth category of risk is the liquidity risk. So this is the risk resultant from an investment that cannot be bought or sold fast enough without incurring or minimizing the loss. This is the greatest risk which is associated with any organization, especially with the day-to-day activities. Liquidity risk is very important for any organization to control. The last category, that is the sixth category of risk, it is called as the hazard risk. So the term hazard is often defined as a risk or danger in many dictionaries. While this word gives the meaning in some situations, it has a specific meaning in the context of occupational safety and the health. In occupational safety, hazard can refer to source of potential damage. In simple words, this refers to something that can cause harm to a person. A hazard can cause harm to anyone because of the harmful chemicals. For example, the chemicals used in the industry can be hazard to the workers since it can cause the adverse health effects. Similarly, loose electric cables can also become a hazard. The danger or the harm can either be immediate or long term. For instance, long term exposure to the chemicals will increase the risk of contracting the diseases like cancer. At the same time, chemicals like strong acids can cause immediate injury. So hazards in a workplace take a variety of forms such as chemicals, electricity, machines, different processes, materials, and other substances. Even if a small condition or material can become a hazard. For example, someone accidentally spilling water on the floor can become a hazard since there is a possibility of someone slipping and falling in that place. So we have now covered with the risk categories. Let's move further and understand what is risk exposure. So risk exposure is a quantified loss potential of business. It is the extent of risk borne by the organization at that time. Risk exposure is usually calculated by multiplying the probability of an incident occurring by its potential losses. So what is risk appetite? Risk appetite is the level of risk that an organization is prepared to accept in pursuit of its objectives before action is deemed necessary to reduce the risk. It is not easy to find out the risk appetite of a company, but we can understand it from the financial statement. The higher the level of risk appetite, the higher the revenue and the net profit would be. Next is what is risk capacity? So risk capacity, unlike the tolerance, is the amount of risk that the investor must take in order to reach the financial goals. So the rate of return necessary to reach these goals can be estimated by examining time frames and income requirements. Risk capacity is the maximum amount of risk that an organization is able to take on, and risk appetite is the amount of risk that an organization is willing to take on, and therefore risk capacity varies with your age, income, and your financial goals. Let's understand the difference between the risk capacity and the risk tolerance. So risk capacity is a measure of the risk you need to take to reach your financial goals, while risk tolerance consider how much risk you are comfortable in taking. And then these two factors will influence your investment decisions and can help develop an investment plan when you pair them with your investment return targets. So what are the key takeaway from this particular session? So key takeaways are: number one, risk capacity and risk tolerance work together to determine the amount of risk taken in an investor personal portfolio. Number two, the risk capacity often has to do with an investor's income and financial resources. Number three, the risk tolerance usually depends on many factors including one's financial plans for the future, income, job, and the